One wrong turn on the 8th floor of St. Jude's Medical Center didn't just alter Thomas's evening. It rewrote his destiny. He walked in looking for his sick daughter, but found a dying stranger instead. What started as an awkward apology became a billion-dollar secret and a desperate, life-saving marriage. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Medical Center hummed with a low, relentless buzz that seemed to vibrate directly into Thomas Hayes's skull. At 34, Thomas felt like a man carrying the weight of the world in a backpack made of lead. He hadn't slept a full night in 3 weeks. His 6-year-old daughter, Chloe, was down on the 4th floor in the pediatric intensive care unit, battling a severe, aggressive autoimmune flare-up that was actively destroying her kidneys. Thomas, a high school history teacher who moonlighted as a rideshare driver to make ends meet, was completely bankrupt. His insurance had maxed out 2 days ago. The hospital's billing department had started calling his cell phone with a frequency that bordered on harassment. Every time he looked at Chloe's pale face, framed by a tangle of sweat-dampened blonde curls, he felt a crushing, suffocating failure. He was supposed to protect her, yet all he could do was watch the monitors and pray to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. It was Tuesday evening, just past 9 o'clock. Thomas had stepped out to grab a black coffee from the dismal cafeteria in the basement. He was running on fumes, his eyes bloodshot and his steps heavy. He entered the elevator, punched the button for the 4th floor, and leaned his forehead against the cool steel wall, closing his eyes. He didn't notice when a nurse stepped in on the 2nd floor and pressed the button for the 8th. He didn't notice when she stepped off. When the doors finally chimed and slid open, Thomas just walked out, a zombie driven by muscle memory. He turned left, counted 3 doors down, and pushed open the heavy oak door of what should have been room 412. Instead of the cramped, shared pediatric room cluttered with stuffed animals and coloring books, Thomas stepped into a cavernous, dimly lit suite. It smelled of expensive lilies and sterile antiseptic. The floor was covered in plush carpet, and large bay windows offered a sweeping, panoramic view of the Seattle skyline. It was the VIP palliative care wing, reserved for those who could afford to die in luxury. "I told you, Jonathan, I'm not signing the addendum until the severance packages are guaranteed." A weak, raspy voice broke the silence. Thomas froze. The voice belonged to a woman lying in a massive, adjustable hospital bed in the center of the room. She was practically swallowed by the pristine white sheets. Intravenous lines snaked from her arms to a tower of blinking machines. She was shockingly thin, her skin almost translucent, with dark, bruising circles under her deep brown eyes. Despite her frail state, there was an unmistakable sharpness to her gaze. She turned her head slowly, expecting a lawyer. Instead, she saw a disheveled man in a faded flannel shirt holding a styrofoam cup of cheap coffee. "You're not Jonathan," she whispered, her brow furrowing. "I am so sorry," Thomas stammered, backing up toward the door, his face flushing hotly. "I'm on the wrong floor. I was looking for pediatric intensive care. My daughter. I took a wrong turn. Please forgive me." He reached for the door handle, but her voice stopped him. "Wait." It was barely more than a breath, but it carried an undeniable authority. "Don't go yet." Thomas paused, his hand on the brass lever. "Mum, I really shouldn't be here. You need your rest." "If I rest any more, I'll be dead," she said, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping her lips, which quickly turned into a dry, rattling cough. Thomas, instinctively reacting with the same care he used with Chloe, stepped forward and poured a glass of water from the bedside pitcher, holding the bendable straw to her lips. She took a small sip, her eyes locked on his face. "Thank you," she breathed, sinking back into the pillows. She looked around the massive, empty room. The silence was deafening. I haven't seen a face today that wasn't holding a clipboard or a legal pad. Just stay. For 3 minutes. Drink your coffee. Tell me about your daughter. Thomas hesitated. The exhaustion in his bones screamed at him to go back to Chloe. But the absolute, crushing loneliness radiating from this woman rooted him to the spot. He pulled up a leather armchair and sat down. Her name is Chloe, Thomas began softly, staring into his black coffee. She's 6. She loves dinosaurs and hates the color pink. She's got an autoimmune condition that the doctors can't quite figure out. It's attacking her kidneys. And you're terrified, the woman said. It wasn't a question. More than I've ever been in my entire life, Thomas admitted, the confession spilling out of him surprisingly easily to this stranger. I'm a teacher. I don't have the money for the experimental treatments they're suggesting. I feel like I'm failing her every single second. The woman watched him, her eyes softening. You're here. You're fighting for her. That's not failure. Failure is building an empire and realizing you have absolutely no one to leave it to. Thomas looked at her properly for the first time. Stripped of the hospital gown and the monitors, he could tell she was a woman who commanded rooms. Even dying, she had a quiet, terrifying dignity. I'm Samantha, she said, offering a weak hand. Thomas, he replied, gently taking her hand. It was cold, so terribly cold. Well, Thomas, Samantha whispered, closing her eyes. Thank you for the wrong turn. It's the most human interaction I've had in 6 months. When Thomas finally stood to leave 10 minutes later, he promised he would pop his head in the next day. He didn't know why he said it, but as he rode the elevator down to the 4th floor, the weight on his chest felt just a fraction lighter. Over the next week, a strange routine developed. Every evening, after Chloe finally fell asleep, exhausted by the dialysis and the aggressive steroids, Thomas would sneak up the fire stairs to the 8th floor. Room 812 became his bizarre sanctuary. He learned that Samantha was 32, suffering from a rare, terminal genetic heart condition that had aggressively accelerated over the past year. Her heart was essentially turning to stone, hardening and failing to pump blood. There was no cure, and she was too weak for a transplant. What Thomas didn't know, what Samantha deliberately kept from him, was her last name, Samantha Caldwell. She was the founder and CEO of Caldwell Logistics, a multi-billion-dollar global supply chain and tech conglomerate. To Thomas, she was just Sam, a sarcastic, brilliant, deeply lonely woman who loved hearing his terrible dad jokes and listening to stories about his chaotic middle school history classes. To Sam, Thomas was a lifeline. He didn't want anything from her. He didn't know about her bank accounts, her stock options, or her sprawling estates. He was just a kind, broken father who brought her terrible vending machine pretzels and treated her like a living, breathing person rather than a decaying asset. But reality has a vicious way of shattering safe havens. On a rainy Thursday night, Thomas walked into room 812 to find the illusion broken. The room was tense, filled with 3 men in bespoke suits. One was Jonathan Pierce, the lawyer Sam had mentioned on their first meeting. The other was a man with slicked-back hair and a cruel, impatient sneer. Richard Caldwell, Sam's older half-brother. You are being utterly ridiculous, Samantha, Richard was snapping, pacing at the foot of her bed. The board is in a panic. The stock is dropping. You are medically unfit to make these decisions. Sign the power of attorney over to me. Let me protect the family legacy. Your idea of protecting the legacy is liquidating the R&D department and firing 4,000 loyal employees to give the shareholders a quick payout, Richard," Sam fired back, her voice shaking with exertion. Her heart monitor was beeping rapidly. "I will die before I let you gut my company." "You are dying, Sam," Richard yelled, slamming his hand on the footboard. "And if you die without a spouse or a named successor, the company trust defaults to the nearest blood relative. That's me. So you can sign this now and die with some dignity, or I can take it from your cold hands by Tuesday." Thomas stood in the doorway, frozen. Billionaire? CEO? He felt a sudden wave of vertigo. Richard finally noticed him. "Who the hell are you? Security is supposed to keep the press out." "I'm not the press," Thomas said, his protective instincts flaring as he saw Sam clutching her chest, struggling for breath. He stepped into the room, placing himself between Richard and the bed. "I'm a friend, and you need to leave. You're distressing her." Richard let out a sharp, mocking bark of a laugh. "A friend? Sam doesn't have friends. She has employees and parasites. I don't know what kind of payout you're looking for, buddy, but you're backing the wrong, dying horse." "Richard, get out," Sam gasped, her face ashen. "Jonathan, get him out, now." The lawyer ushered a furious Richard out of the room. Once the door clicked shut, the silence was suffocating. Thomas stared at Sam, the vending machine pretzels in his hand, suddenly feeling incredibly stupid. "Caldwell?" Thomas asked quietly. "As in, Caldwell Logistics?" Sam wouldn't meet his eyes. "I didn't tell you because I liked that you didn't know. The moment people find out what I'm worth, the math in their eyes changes. You just looked at me. Like me." "Sam, Thomas ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. "I don't care about your money, but your brother, he's going to destroy everything you built." "I know." A tear finally slipped down Sam's cheek. "There's a loophole in my father's trust. If I die unmarried and without children, my shares bypass my chosen board of directors and default directly to Richard. He will dismantle the company. He'll fire thousands of people who rely on me." She looked up at Thomas, her dark eyes suddenly fierce, burning with a desperate, crazy light. "Thomas, how much is Chloe's experimental treatment?" Thomas blinked, thrown by the sudden pivot. "What?" "The treatment. At the Mayo Clinic. The one your insurance denied. How much?" It's over $400,000, Thomas whispered, shame coloring his cheeks. "Plus travel, lodging, aftercare. It's impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Sam breathed. She hit a button on her bed, raising herself up slightly. She looked at Jonathan, the lawyer, who was standing quietly in the corner. "Jonathan, draw up a marriage certificate and an ironclad prenuptial agreement." Jonathan's eyes widened. "Samantha, you can't be serious." "I am completely serious," Sam said, her voice finding its steel. She turned to Thomas. "Thomas, marry me." Thomas actually took a step back, the air rushing from his lungs. "Sam, you're on heavy medication. You don't know what you're saying." "I have never been more lucid in my entire life," she countered, her gaze pinning him to the spot. "Listen to me. If I die married, my shares transfer to my husband. In the prenup, we will stipulate that upon my death, you will immediately transfer voting rights of those shares to my trusted board of directors. You will save my company from my brother." "And in return?" Thomas asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. "In return," Sam said softly, "I will immediately wire $5 million into an irrevocable trust for Chloe. You can fly her to the Mayo Clinic tomorrow. You will never, ever have to worry about a medical bill again." The room spun. Thomas thought of the debt collectors. He thought of his empty bank account. But most of all, he thought of Chloe, lying 4 floors down, her body giving up on her. He thought of the terrifying, agonizing prospect of burying his little girl because he simply didn't have the cash to save her. "It's fraud," Thomas whispered, terrified. "It's a legal binding contract," Jonathan, the lawyer, interjected quietly, adjusting his glasses. "Unconventional. Highly. But if Samantha is of sound mind, and you both consent, it is completely legal, and it will legally block Richard Caldwell from seizing the company assets." Thomas looked at Sam. She was literally dying before his eyes, yet she was fighting a war from her deathbed to protect people she would never see again. And she was handing him the sword he needed to save his daughter's life. "I won't be a vulture," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want $5 million, Sam. I just want to save Chloe. I just need the medical costs." "You'll take the $5 million, Thomas, or I'll leave it to a dog shelter," Sam smiled, a genuine, albeit weak, smile. "Consider it payment for the terrible dad jokes. Please, let me do one good thing before my heart finally stops." Thomas closed his eyes. The image of Chloe's pale face flashed in his mind. When he opened them, his resolve was set. "Okay," Thomas breathed. "Okay, I'll marry you." 48 hours later, room 812 was transformed into the most morbid wedding venue in Seattle. An ordained hospital chaplain stood at the foot of the bed. Thomas wore his only clean suit, a slightly too large navy two-piece he hadn't worn since his own high school graduation. Sam wore a beautiful silk robe over her hospital gown, her breathing labored, her skin gray, but her eyes sharp and triumphant. They exchanged vows in hushed tones, the beeping of the EKG machine serving as their wedding march. When Thomas slid a simple gold band, bought hastily from a pawn shop down the street, onto Sam's frail finger, her hand trembled in his. "By the power vested in me by the state of Washington, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the chaplain said softly. Just as Thomas leaned down to press a gentle, chaste kiss to Sam's forehead, the door burst open. Richard Caldwell stood there, his face purple with rage, holding a stack of legal injunctions. "Stop!" Richard roared, lunging into the room. "This is a sham. She's out of her mind. I have a judge's order to halt any legal proceedings." Jonathan Pierce calmly stepped forward, holding up the freshly signed and stamped marriage certificate. "You're about 5 minutes too late, Richard," Jonathan said smoothly. "May I introduce you to Mr. Thomas Hayes, Samantha's legal husband and the sole inheritor of the Caldwell estate." Sam looked at her brother, a vicious, satisfied smile crossing her lips before a sudden, violent coughing fit racked her frail body. The monitors around her began to wail, a shrill, piercing alarm that cut through the tension in the room. Code blue, room 812. The hospital intercom shattered the heavy silence of the VIP wing. Thomas was violently shoved aside as a tidal wave of medical personnel flooded the room. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, the lead cardiologist, sprinted past Richard, a defibrillator already charging in the hands of an assisting nurse. "Clear!" Dr. Jenkins shouted. The heavy thud of the paddles sent Samantha's frail body convulsing off the mattress. The monitor remained a flat, terrifying green line. Richard grabbed Thomas by the lapels of his ill-fitting navy suit, slamming him against the corridor wall. "You listen to me, you pathetic grifter," Richard snarled, his spit hitting Thomas's cheek. "The second she flatlines, I am tying you up in so much litigation, you won't be able to afford the dirt for your daughter's grave." Before Thomas could react, Jonathan Pierce, the lawyer, stepped between them, his normally calm demeanor replaced by an icy glare. "Take your hands off my client, Richard. As of 3 minutes ago, Mr. Hayes holds the proxy to 51% of Caldwell Logistics. If you threaten him again, I'll have you arrested for assault." Richard sneered, releasing his grip, but his eyes promised war. He stormed toward the elevators, dialing his own legal team before the doors even opened. Back in the room, the terrifying rhythmic compression of CPR continued. Thomas slid down the wall, putting his head between his knees, entirely overwhelmed. He had just married a dying billionaire to save his little girl, and now he was watching his wife of 5 minutes slip away. "We have a pulse!" a nurse suddenly yelled. The flat line on the monitor flickered, then spiked into a weak, erratic, but undeniable rhythm. Samantha Caldwell was alive. She had slipped into a deep, medically induced coma to stabilize her failing organs, but she was still breathing. Jonathan knelt beside Thomas, handing him a sleek black briefcase. "The wire transfer to the Mayo Clinic has cleared, Thomas. The medical transport jet is waiting at Boeing Field. Go save your daughter. I will handle Richard and the board." For the next 6 months, Thomas lived in a sterile, terrifying bubble in Rochester, Minnesota. Under the care of Dr. Alistair Sterling, a world-renowned pediatric nephrologist at the Mayo Clinic, Chloe underwent a grueling regimen of targeted immunotherapy and experimental stem cell dialysis. During the day, Thomas held his daughter's hand, reading her stories about dinosaurs and knights. But at night, from his rented apartment, the high school history teacher transformed. Acting as Samantha's proxy, Thomas attended virtual emergency board meetings for Caldwell Logistics. He faced down a boardroom full of corporate sharks. Richard attempted every ruthless tactic in the book to freeze the assets, launch a vote of no confidence, and liquidate the R&D department. But Thomas, armed with Jonathan's legal brilliance and a teacher's absolute refusal to be bullied, held the line. He used his proxy votes to block every single one of Richard's motions. He protected the employees. He protected Sam's legacy. Then came the twist that no one, not even the most cynical Wall Street analyst, saw coming. It was a Tuesday in November. Chloe was sitting up in bed, color back in her cheeks, laughing as she painted a plastic T-Rex bright green. Thomas's phone rang. It was Jonathan. "Thomas!" The lawyer's voice was uncharacteristically thick with emotion. "Are you sitting down?" Did Sam pass away?" Thomas asked, his stomach plummeting. Over the months, defending her life's work had made him feel strangely close to the sleeping woman he barely knew. "No." Jonathan breathed a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "Thomas, she woke up. And because you successfully blocked Richard from freezing the corporate funds, the board was able to finance an emergency, highly experimental operation. A surgical team in Zurich just successfully implanted a synthetic biotissue heart valve. Thomas, she's going to survive." Thomas dropped the phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor. He looked at Chloe, who was vibrant and alive, and then out the window at the Minnesota snow. The impossible had happened. Twice. A year later, the Seattle rain was drumming a familiar rhythm against the windows of Thomas's modest 2-bedroom duplex. It was a Saturday. Chloe, fully in remission and bursting with 7-year-old energy, was in the living room watching cartoons. Thomas was at the kitchen counter, grading a stack of 8th-grade essays on the Industrial Revolution. He hadn't touched a single dime of the Caldwell fortune beyond the medical costs and the initial flight to the Mayo Clinic. He had legally transferred the proxy votes back to Samantha the moment she was declared medically competent. She had reclaimed her throne, ruthlessly ousted Richard from the company entirely, and vanished back into the stratosphere of the global elite. They were legally married, yet entirely separate. 2 ghosts tethered by a piece of paper. A sleek, midnight black Maybach silently pulled up to the curb outside the duplex. Thomas watched through the blinds as a chauffeur opened the back door. A woman stepped out. She wore a tailored charcoal trench coat and designer boots. Her dark hair, once thin and lifeless, was cut in a sharp, elegant bob. The bruising under her eyes was gone, replaced by a formidable, healthy glow. Samantha Caldwell walked up his cracked concrete driveway. Thomas opened the door before she could knock. They stared at each other. The last time they had been this close, she was on her deathbed, and he was in a cheap, oversized suit. "Hello, husband," Samantha said, a small, nervous smile playing on her lips. "Sam," Thomas breathed, stepping aside to let her in. You look incredible." "I have a pulse and a functioning circulatory system. It does wonders for the complexion," she replied dryly, stepping into the small entryway. She looked around the cluttered, cozy living room. Her eyes landed on Chloe, who was staring wide-eyed at the glamorous stranger. "Are you the lady from the hospital?" Chloe asked, clutching her green T-Rex. "The one Daddy helped?" Samantha knelt, bringing herself to eye level with the little girl. "I am. And your daddy told me you were incredibly brave. He sent me letters while I was asleep, you know. He told me all about how strong you were getting." Thomas froze. "Jonathan gave you the letters?" Samantha stood up, turning to face Thomas, her corporate armor melting away to reveal a raw, terrifying vulnerability. "He did. During my recovery in Zurich, when the physical therapy was agonizing and I wanted to quit, Jonathan read me your updates. I read about Chloe's first steps without the IV pole. I read about you grading papers at 2 a.m. You gave me a reason to fight, Thomas. I realized I had $1 billion, but I had absolutely no one to share a Saturday morning with." She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Richard is launching one final desperate lawsuit," Samantha explained, her tone shifting back to business. "He's petitioning the state Supreme Court to annul our marriage on the grounds of fraud and non-consummation. If he proves it was a sham, he can retroactively challenge my medical proxy and try to claw back the company." Thomas looked at the envelope. "So, you need me to sign an affidavit? Or do we need to make a public appearance to prove we're together?" "I don't want to fake it, Thomas," Samantha said quietly, stepping closer to him. The scent of expensive lilies was gone, replaced by the warm smell of vanilla and rain. "I'm 33 years old. I almost died, having never really lived. I don't want an annulment. I don't want to go back to my empty penthouse. I want to see if we can be real." Thomas looked at the woman who had saved his daughter's life. He saw the fierce intelligence in her eyes, but also the deep, lingering loneliness that he recognized from his own reflection. "I'm a public school teacher, Sam," Thomas warned gently. "I drive a 2012 Honda Civic. I don't know the first thing about your world. And I don't know the first thing about middle school history or how to make a decent cup of coffee," Samantha countered, her eyes flashing with that familiar stubbornness. "But we are both very good at surviving. I think we can figure this out." 3 weeks later, the Seattle tabloids went wild. Richard Caldwell arrived at the King County Courthouse, flanked by high-priced litigators, ready to expose his sister's fraudulent marriage. Instead, he was met by a wall of cameras as a black Maybach pulled up. Samantha Caldwell stepped out, looking radiant and utterly untouchable. But it wasn't a bodyguard who offered her a hand. It was Thomas Hayes, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that finally fit his broad shoulders. And holding his other hand was a laughing, healthy 7-year-old girl. Samantha leaned into Thomas, her smile genuine and bright as the camera flashes erupted around them. As they walked past a furious, defeated Richard, Thomas leaned down and whispered in his wife's ear. "Did I ever tell you the joke about the Roman emperor who walked into a bar?" Samantha groaned, a real, bubbling laugh escaping her. "If you finish that terrible joke, I'm filing for divorce." "No, you won't." Thomas smiled, squeezing her hand. "You're stuck with me." And as they walked through the heavy oak doors of the courthouse, a family forged in the fires of a hospital room, they both knew it was the absolute truth. Sometimes the universe disguises its greatest miracles as terrible mistakes. A wrong turn off a hospital elevator brought a desperate father and a dying billionaire together for a transaction built on survival. Yet, from the cold ashes of a legal contract, a profound, beating heart emerged. Thomas and Samantha proved that while money can alter your circumstances, it takes a leap of faith to actually save a life.